Welcome to the Queer Witch Project, your resource for all things queer and witchy. I am Damona Peacock, a fabulous, non-binary, narrow, spicy, ordained queerdo with a fascination for all things cycles, symbolism, and patterns.
And I'm Moonkittee, your queer femme polycation witch and proud geek. Today's topic is spiritual ethics. Is it a cult?
Is it a cult? Is it a cult?
Now, I know this happens to be a topic you adore. It's such a great thing for you. You just love everything about this. So I wanted to make sure we did this one for you, but also for our listeners, because like it's really important
Yes.
to have this information, because when we talk about ethics, and let's be honest, no one likes to talk about ethics. Ethics is boring.
It's not easy to talk about.
And it's hard and it's so subjective and everything else, but it's needed and it's necessary. And having an ethical route that you are taking, whatever it may be, is important, and especially on a spiritual path.
Magical ethics.
In an area where there is a lot of misinformation to start with, having a very defined sense of spiritual ethics is incredibly important. So with that, we are going to dive in and
it seems like an odd topic to have like such a passion about, right?
No, I mean, I don't think it's weird.
Good.
Maybe but then again, I find legislation and reading legislation and creating things fascinating. So we all have our weird quirks.
Cool. Yeah.
But no, I think it's important to talk about. And I think ethics as a concept is important to talk about.
Right.
So,
and my hyperfixation is really in cults and cult mentality and the way cults work and how they draw people in and why people are drawn in, because it's not just like brainwashed dumb people that are joining cults or that are become a part of cults. It can be highly intelligent people.
Yes.
But there's just like something about human nature that can draw people in. And it fascinates me. I watch as many cult documentaries as I can get my hands on. If a new one comes out, some of my closest people know me well enough to be like, "Hey, did you see this new cult documentary over here on the streaming platform?" And so here's the rabbit hole that I have fallen into lately is SPTV on YouTube, which probably goes right over your head. But if anybody else is somebody else out there might know what it is, but it's suppressive person TV. But it's basically a whole bunch of ex-Scientologists that are talking about all of the multitude of crimes that Scientology are still enacting.
Wow.
Because it sounds interesting. Cult. Yeah. And it's done a lot of so, but I've just always first of all, I think that I'm very passionate about avoiding getting into cults, avoiding being in cults. I may have had a personal experience that was cult-esque, culty. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I feel like my spiritual path for me personally and what I want to, if I were to, I definitely don't want to proselytize, but if I were to gift wisdom to others, and maybe in a Hierophant kind of way, it is that we should be pursuing personal empowerment and our own personal relationships with spirit, and not go through a middleman or a middle person, not be told what to believe. That's really hard for some people, though.
Yeah, and how to believe it.
Because it makes us susceptible to being manipulated, being,
and I think it's
control.
I think it's human nature to want the easy button. And sometimes it can
not
be
my
very
nature,
difficult.
But I agree that a lot of people are drawn to that. And, there's also, I do remember being new and feeling very I remember learning magic thinking, oh, I want to learn about this stuff, but I'll never do it myself. I did because I was like, oh, I'll never have a grasp of it to really know what I'm doing or do it responsibly. So I'll just learn about it and watch it, but I won't ever participate. Oh, that went out the window at some point.
Oh, real fast.
Yeah.
So what do we mean, bringing this back around? What do we mean by spiritual ethics?
Okay, so
we'll start with that and then we'll dive into the cult aspect of it.
Cool. What do we mean by ethics?
Ooh. So for me, if what I understand is ethics generally mean values and principles that have a moral value or a moral nature to them.
Yes,
So what we
we
determine
derive our
right or
own
wrong.
I was asking someone else, like, what's the difference between ethics and morals?
Hmm.
And they were saying that morals, this is a friend of mine, morals, is kind of like universally agreed upon, or like culturally, more or less culturally agreed upon
Hmm.
values. And then ethics is like how you personally choose to, what your principles are based on these
Hmm.
morals that you were taught or that you picked up somewhere along the way. But your ethics is kind of like your personal
Code.
way of moving. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Makes
Which
sense.
kind of makes sense, but
Yeah.
this is also, ethics is kind of a thought form, so it's ambiguous,
Hmm.
and it's open to interpretation, which is why, like, oh, this is such an interesting topic to me,
Hmm.
the ethics part. And then the cult part is like kind of a subcategory
Hmm.
thing. But yeah, I did a little bit of research. I polled some people about spiritual ethics. I wrote a list of kind of universally, so talk about like who I polled, and then I'll kind of, but yeah, so a lot of our morals or ethics are also derived by our spiritual
Hmm.
teachings and principles, which, and not all people have that or go through it in a spiritual level, but it's also a cultural thing, right? So a
Hmm.
lot of our laws are based off of morals and values of the
Hmm.
culture. But then also there are laws that are unethical, that can be,
Hmm.
like you'd feel like are unethical. Like, I don't think that we need to be letting people starve and punishing them for wanting access to food
Hmm.
and stuff. So that's,
So it's, yeah,
there's a lot of rabbit holes in spiritual ethics
there's
that we
so
could end
many
up going
things
down.
that can go through.
Like, how
So,
many churches are raising money and tax exempt money with, and the idea that churches get tax exemption is because they're supposed to be serving the community, but are they, or are they serving their own purposes and building their own mega churches? But are they feeding the poor? Are they doing those things that some of the spiritual
mhm,
teachers would have been asking you to be doing?
right. It's that matter of what are you saying versus what are you doing, and who is it truly serving? And
Yeah.
I love that idea. I think we'll get more into that.
Yeah.
Let's hold that, put a pin
Okay.
in it, and keep moving forward.
All right. So
We're
some of
talking about the
this,
idea of spiritual ethics. So
so
we know
some of this,
that.
I have some
Uh,
examples of spiritual
okay.
ethics if you would like.
So before we dive into those examples of spiritual
Okay.
ethics, let's continue a little bit more what we mean by it. So we know they're just, it means values and principles. They're subjective. Morals are kind of cultural, and ethics are our personal interpretation of the
Mm-hmm.
cultural into the whole. Now, we're talking about spirituality. We're talking about the idea
Ah,
of faith
right.
and the unknown path and the
Yeah.
unseeable path. So the things that we would see and do in the mundane world, in the common world, we're talking about a different level here, because you
Right.
can't
And
say I'm not gonna I won't steal from, or I won't take from this. I guess you can't say I won't take from this deity or and give to this deity, or whatever it may be. So it's not quite as black and white in the spiritual sense of
right.
what we're doing. But what we are looking at in when we're talking about spiritual energy and spiritual ethics, I think is how are we using our own energy
Yes.
to affect the world around us.
Yes. And how aware are we of our energy, the energy around us, the energy of others?
Hmm.
How responsible are we with our own
Hmm.
energy, and with how we manage the energies around us?
Hmm.
So there's a lot about, so I feel like the spiritual part of the
Hmm.
spiritual ethics definition would be like awareness of the unseen, awareness of the unknown, awareness around how energy works,
Hmm.
how within you and without, and how there's an interaction between those things.
And that's not something we really that we aren't taught to do. Where in a lot of ways we're taught to do other things
Not
that
in the
they
mundane world, but we
no, but we're taught,
hopefully are talking about it in this spiritual world.
right, that
Not
awareness, something
necessarily in
comes.
the overculture spiritual world,
Mhm.
though.
Right. But yeah, it's something that's something that has to be kind of learned and taught, because it's like, hey, there's energy around you. Like, okay, there's energy around me. What do I do with it?
Or in
Uh,
everything.
but yeah, how you do that and
Yeah,
what you manipulate and the processes for doing it, I think that's where it comes into that idea of
right.
what of that spiritual ethic thing. So and that
Because
leads
as a
into
magical practitioner, we
Mhm.
believe in the awareness of the energy in and around and within
Right.
everything, just in the atoms of, everything, and also in just the essence of stuff. Even in thought forms, the
Hmm.
energy that and matter that behind thought forms or ideas that take
Intention.
root or take shape, intentions. As magical practitioners, that's literally what we're working with.
So with that, we have the common examples of what spiritual ethics mean in the broader sense. So this is where we start crossing that line between what is the mundane into what are the most common spiritual ethics that we are
Yeah,
generally taught as people.
right. So I'm on a few Facebook groups and spiritual
Hmm.
groups. There's one that's pretty active that I really like because it's for neurospicy witches.
Hmm.
So it like
Nice.
really feeds my brain because it's like people who speak my language, and it's very active and there's a lot of
Hmm.
people. And I was sitting here preparing for this topic thinking like, where did I learn my spiritual ethics from?
Hmm.
I cannot pinpoint a book or an article or I it's just, and this is, so I had a lot of questions just to
Hmm.
kind of poll a group of people. And one of the questions is like, where do you learn that from? Like, what resources would you recommend? And the majority of the answers, there were some recommendations, but mostly people are like, I don't know. You just kind of pick it up somewhere, and then you work with it, and then you kind of reevaluate it, and you figure out if that really hits true for you or not. But
Hmm.
it's like something but there are some like very common answers that people gave. The first one that like popped off, which I really appreciate, was consent. Consent is key. That is not just ethics,
Hmm.
human ethics, but like spiritual ethics, as in, and this is like a big pet peeve of mine, like don't go up to someone and be like, oh, I read this in your aura and I have to give you this message, you should hear this, because you don't, like, even if you do know the person, like, they didn't ask you.
Hmm.
So, do not impose your spiritual practices onto anybody else. Don't come on my doorstep trying to proselytize me.
Hmm.
But yeah, consent. I think if people are open to receiving spiritual wisdom, they're going to ask for it.
Hmm.
You can make yourself available as a reader, as a practitioner, as a spiritual guide, as a guru or a hierophant or whatever you want to call yourself. Make yourself available, but don't go pushing it on other people. That is not, in my opinion, ethical.
Ah, evangelism. Yes. I mean, and that takes multiple things. We see you're talking about it in the sense of the stop in the TikToks or in the something else like stop, I have a message for you in your Instagram
That bugs
DMs
me.
kind of thing. But think of
Yeah.
the classic example of the Jehovah's Witnesses coming
Yeah.
to
Mm-hmm.
doorsteps with the Bibles and everything else and just cold call knocking on everyone's door and leaving pamphlets
Okay.
in there if you don't answer the door. That cold call evangelicalism or evangelizing and proselytizing, as you said, that's such a core principle of a lot of traditional Christian. All of that they're aspects of faith that have strong culty connections to them,
Right. And I
but
just
things
think
that
that
are
if people aren't seeking out, I mean, if people want spiritual guidance, they'll go to who they, like, I don't
Mhm,
need to be told what I should be believing by somebody who doesn't know me.
right. No, I totally get that. But or in that kind of same vein of not going and jumping out there and jumping into someone's space, when we think of the idea of organized spirituality, organized
Yeah.
religion, organized spirituality, there are some generalized common examples that do tend to come up with that kind of crossover into that idea of spiritual ethics. And the most common of the Christian Catholic kind of faith is do unto others as you would have done unto you.
That's on my list. It's called the Golden Rule.
Yes.
And I have a rant on that one too. I probably have a rant on all of these because when I was in kindergarten and I was taught the Golden Rule, you treat others how you want them to treat you. That is not how it worked. I was very nice and kind to people, and I still got bullied and
Hmm.
and treated, othered, and I mean, there's could be reasons for it that I now understand, but didn't then. I didn't. Nobody understood my neurospiciness and other things, but still, like in principle, it's great, but I
In
don't see it
practice.
always in practice in this world.
Right.
So yeah, but yeah, the golden rule is one of those
Hmm.
kind of spiritual ethics, and it definitely, there's, and it's funny, like even ones that we have as pagans
Hmm.
can be reflected in other religions. So I think that was the golden rule: do this and other, or treat people the way you wish to be treated. So
Hmm.
another big one that we hear is do no harm. Do no
Hmm.
harm is a and it harm none, do what you will, is a
Hmm.
big one for pagans that I hear. And then we get into debates about, well, you can intend no harm, but the impact isn't always under our control. And
Right.
there is always unconscious or unintended harms that we are enacting upon the world constantly. It's almost like we're in this whole knowledge of life and death struggle thing.
Hmm.
So you could aim to do no harm, but you're also then maybe possibly fooling yourself and not being aware of the unintended consequences.
Hmm.
I think the workaround for that one is to try to be very aware of what you're doing,
Hmm.
um, of what your intentions are, what your actions and consequences are. And then so other people say do no harm but take no shit.
Hmm.
That's the other side, is like, I'll do no harm unless you cross me, and then haha, I will protect myself
Hmm.
magically if I have to. Like
Right.
a lot of people are against baneful magic and some people are for it, or certain, how you enact that, it
Hmm.
probably will align with what your ethics are. And then close to do no harm and do no harm but take no shit is the rule of three, the Wiccan Rede. I
Hmm.
heard people talking about a lot, and that's the concept that what you put out into the world will return to you times three. So if you put an abundance spell out into the world, you'll and that's something people can choose to believe.
Hmm.
That could be somebody's principle, because it can could keep people from doing too much baneful magic or
Hmm.
causing too much chaos or harm, because it's like, well, if I'm going to put that out there, I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of it times three. But like, not everybody signs up for that times three
Hmm.
belief. It's kind of maybe a thought that's more into some certain people's beliefs but not others, you
Right. And
know
that ties in with the idea of karma.
right. And see, and that's also been kind of appropriated from like the
Hmm.
Buddhist and Hindu traditions, and then we have our westernized idea of karma.
Hmm.
But regardless of like karma or the rule of three, uh or where these concepts have originated or been shared, I do kind of believe that like attracts like, and the rule of attraction and these
Hmm.
kind of things. So like I do believe that what you're putting out there into the world is likely what you're going to start encountering. And
Hmm.
so honestly, kind of with that thought in mind, when I'm struggling financially, but I have some dollars in cash in my pocket and I see somebody asking for a handout, I feel like if I'm generous to them, the universe will return that generosity some way.
Hmm.
Not that that's not the only reason I'm doing it. I think it's also
Right.
because I mean, I also ethically believe that people should have access to resources. They don't always
Hmm.
have to like, earn their keep in the world. I just think we should be able to feed people,
Hmm.
and care for people. But I do also think that like, money hoarding is an illness, and
Hmm.
no matter how rough things get financially, I also still want to be generous. And I do want to attract that kind of energy in my life. And I do then strive to project that kind of energy in my life.
Hmm.
So, yeah, all of these are kind of like some concepts. And then again,
Right.
some people can subscribe to these things and other
Right.
people won't. Some
Right.
people will hardcore be like, yeah, that is my truth. And other people will be like, that's negotiable, or let's discuss this.
Right. And yeah, sometimes you are the feather, sometimes you are the whip, I guess. It's really a matter of what you're what your own
Here,
belief system is coming back should do something, because
yeah.
it's like I said, going back to the idea of baneful magic is, and that rule of three is, maybe what you can do is that three-time power coming back to someone
Mm,
else. So
mm.
maybe you
Right.
are
Return to
the
senders.
return to sender.
Maybe
Exactly.
you, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here's one for you that I
Hmm.
I, I wrote down because I knew you would appreciate this as a kitchen witch, but
Hmm.
ethically, responsibly sourcing materials. Because when it comes to sourcing materials ethically, it's like,
Hmm.
how well do you know where your crystals are coming from?
Hmm.
Because there are some mines that are doing environmental damage and slave labor.
Hmm.
Even chocolate can be controversial.
Yes.
So, but the other side of this is if you are growing a garden
Hmm.
and collecting herbs and veggies and fruits, are you leaving offerings for those plants? Are you thanking them? Are you asking permission to harvest?
Hmm.
Are you leaving offerings? How are you tending to them? How are you caring? Or are you just taking? Are you
Hmm.
making sure to take a third and leave some for the others or the rest? Or, let nature have some, that sort
Hmm.
of thing. So there's a lot of stuff that could be considered when it's talking about sourcing materials ethically
Hmm.
as well.
Absolutely.
Another one that's very well, here's an easy one: compassion.
Mm.
Compassion can be a spiritual ethic that, I just want to move forward with compassion. I don't want to be selfish or self-centered or, whatever the contrast of that is, but
Hmm.
um trying to treat people compassionately.
Hmm.
That can be, so that's a kind of an easy one that not everybody wants to debate, but here's one that can be a hot debate: appropriation.
Hmm.
So I've heard people saying, I'm going to stay in my lane, and I will respect closed practices. But then there's that other aspect of I want to be open and learn, without appropriating, without trying to make money off of somebody else's
Hmm.
culture. I want to respect that culture. And in order to respect it, I want to know more about it. Again, respecting closed practices, not trying to make money off of something that's been repressed in other
Hmm.
cultures. So like appropriation versus appreciation. That's
Hmm.
that's a hot topic
Very hot
often,
topic.
right? And I think that would, so the thing about spiritual ethics is
Hmm.
they can be hot topics.
Yes.
There's a lot of debate that can be said about them. And if you've got some thoughts and feelings or things that we haven't talked about that I hadn't considered, please leave us
Hmm.
comments and share with us what your thoughts and feelings are. If it's a hot topic for you, if you've got a pet peeve, I want to hear about it. I do want to learn what other people believe
Hmm.
and how they practice and what they deem ethical. I'm very fascinated by all of this because I do feel like I've got kind of a sense of my own personal strong
Hmm.
ethics and awareness of some morals, and I don't always know where they've all come from when I can't always pinpoint where I learned them from. I've picked them up from a lot of different
Hmm.
places and I've kept what feels right to me, what feels good in me,
Hmm.
and I've rejected a lot because I have a an inner rebel.
For me, it's a lot of times I'll believe something, and then until I'm told something that's wrong or given me a different perspective, it's like, oh, okay, that is bordering on appropriation. That is a bordering on this. So let me try to shift that. Ignorance, I believe there's genuine ignorance where you didn't know something. Once you're made aware of it, you make a change and correct that. And I think that is a natural progression of human nature. Then
Yeah.
there's will for ignorance,
Yeah.
where you are choosing to not learn what the right thing is because you don't want to face the consequences of what that may be.
Yeah,
And then
the
there's
truth
just
is
ignoring it.
inconvenient.
Yeah, truth is
Right.
inconvenient. So for me, it's a matter of I do the best I can with things that
Yeah.
I think that are I try to be morally and ethically neutral, leaning to good. All about that moral balance and ethical balance on any individual situation. I think
Or
that's what
also
can
like
really
the
also change.
unethical enforcement of
Hmm.
laws can be a
Yes,
problem.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Think of all of the drug laws that disproportionately affect
Yes.
minority
Mm-hmm.
races, and
Right.
how many people were imprisoned in the 80s, 90s, and early
Right.
2000s
For marijuana.
for marijuana, and now a whole bunch of white people are profiting off of marijuana farms and cannabis and
Yeah.
everything else, while
Right.
those people are still in prison
Right.
for things that are now
Or have a
legal.
record.
It's just, or
Right.
have, again, a permanent record for those kinds of things. So there's a whole lot of inequity that needs to be addressed. But again, that's a different topic. We should probably jump off of this one right now.
Like that was not the topic of that more or less covers the list that I had made from the ideas
Mhm.
that I had gotten, kind of taken like just the ones that I heard on multiple, like in multiple comments. And
Mhm.
but I also did get some comment that I thought was like really good because they told some analogy or a
Okay, yeah, I'd love
story,
to hear it.
right? That they teach their students. There's two little analogies, or I don't know what you would call these,
Analogies,
but
parables, maybe?
parable, that was the word I was looking for. And I didn't get permission to like give their full name, so I'm just going to say this person's name is Kelly, who gave, and thank you, Kelly, for your comment. I'm totally going to quote you. um so they say, I teach my students as I was taught, the ripple effect. There is a clear pond and you get your water from. One day you throw a rock into a pond, you see the ripples moving outward. These are the expected and known outcomes. However, the rock drops below the surface where you cannot see, and the effects are unknown. There may be a fish swimming below who gets hit by the rock and dies. That fish eats large in the pond, which now has no predator and so multiplies out of control. These large fish, these large eat the pond grass, which is now decimated by the overpopulation. So now the mud at the bottom is not stable as there are no roots at the pond. It becomes toxic. You drink from it and become sick. These are the unknown, unpredictable outcomes. What we do, we must consider. We never truly know all of the outcomes of our
Mhm.
actions, so we should tread with care. All of our actions should be done with thought. And
Mhm.
I would wager to say awareness.
Mhm.
And this is why we, talk about a lot of that, not just driving out of, semi-consciousness. And
Mhm.
yeah, so we do want to really use awareness and think through thoughts and actions. And then here's the other I teach is our
Mhm.
word is our bond. Words are sounds, our vibrations, our energy.
Mhm.
And I love that we were talking about energy earlier.
Mhm.
Well, what we're listening to right now, it's an energy vibration that's coming
Mhm.
out of a speaker or going
Right.
into a microphone, out of my mouth to the microphone, from there to the internet, and then out to your speaker. So words are energy. The universe is energy, and our words have power. We are our words, our actions. And when we say something, we connect to that energy within that universe, within the universe.
Mhm.
So again, a lot of awareness around what words are you using? What are you putting out there?
Mhm.
What thoughts are you expressing?
I
And I'm
love it.
definitely not saying toxic positivity over here,
Right.
but just awareness and
Mhm.
ownership of not
Yeah.
only the, intended and known outcomes or consequences, but that there are the unknowns, and
Right.
there are unintended but still impactful it consequences to thoughts and actions.
Mhm. And when you're made aware of one of those consequences and action of consequences of your action that was unintended, then you should address what happened with that unintended consequence. So if you
And
know,
learn.
and learn from it. So let's dive into the other aspect of it, kind of the more negative aspect. And your favorite part of this is, let's talk a little bit more about cults
Okay.
and cult behavior, and why is it and how is it that we can go from this idea of this group, let's call any kind of, I want to start, I want to have an idea, I have a faith that I practice, or I have a belief system that works really really well for me. People ask me about it, I start teaching it to others, and then suddenly it's become this thing, and now I've got a cult on my hands. I've created a cult. What How does that happen? What are the things that you kind of need to look at if you are looking into a practice, um, to be discerning and to look at when you're trying to find your own spiritual practice, especially as a new baby pagan?
That's hard.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it's you got to get in it to know.
Okay.
Sometimes I definitely learned the hard way. So for me personally, I joined a circle. I was trained as a priestess under the circle, under the priestess of the circle. I was so young. I didn't know it at the
Mhm.
time, but there were, now looking back, or, things that I found out later, I was being manipulated.
Mhm.
Um, they were taking advantage of some of my feelings. There is some thought control going on, so you can only learn from this, approved list of resources, and our grimoire, Book of Shadows, must believe as we believe. You must practice as we practice. It was a very like heteronormative type circle where you have to have a priestess and a priest, because only women can channel the goddess and only men can channel the god. Roll my fucking
Mhm.
eyes. Sorry. Um, and there was also this moment where like it was debated whether a gay couple would be able to run a circle because they were two men, and just like, so. And then the other thing, so thought control is a big one.
Mhm.
And one of those red flags. Actually, I just want to say, if you Google, is it a cult?
Mhm.
In somewhere in the Google world, there is some kind of list, that different lists that people have put together, um, checklists or lists of red flags that you can look at
Mhm.
and be like, okay, does it do this? Does it do that? Does it do that? And I didn't, write them all down, but I do encourage people to look it up. But one of
Mhm.
it is, thought control. And then one of the big ones that I personally experienced was the detachment or isolation,
Mhm.
where you're encouraged to not to disconnect from people who aren't in the group. So I personally was very heavily encouraged to disconnect from my family. At the time I was living with them, so that was really awkward.
Mhm.
And then the big one that really that really started to get me like wondering was, anytime somebody would leave the circle, we weren't allowed to be friends with them anymore. And it didn't
Mhm.
make sense to me. I'm like, you don't get to control who my friends are and are not.
Mhm.
Like, just because they no longer come to these services or participate in our festivals, just because they're kind of done with your drama BS, because that was always a thing too. Like, I guess
Mhm.
it always happens when you put groups of people together, but there was like some stuff going on. But people will get fed up and leave, and then all of a sudden I'm not allowed to be their friend anymore. And I kind of didn't care, and I still remained friends with some people who had
Mhm.
left. And then I was treated poorly because I broke that unspoken culty type rule in that group. Of course, I didn't stay. Eventually, I reached my last straw with them as well. And
Mhm.
then here's a big sign that you were in a cult. If you leave a group and there is a group of people who are ex-members who get together to kind of unpack and the trauma of having experienced being a part of that group, and you kind of bond with them after you leave the group, because they're the few people that so this is what, I
Mhm.
ended up becoming, I had a friend circle that was literally just people who had left this group,
Hmm.
because we were all kind of unpacking all the things that didn't really sit right, that didn't seem right, that we were taught, that now you can like kind of look back and be like,
Wait a minute, yeah.
right. And the funny thing is I end up having a lot of mixed feelings, because this was my introduction to paganism. This is, the first people who kind of saw me as a priestess and kind of taught me some
Mhm.
of my basic principles. And I'm sure that I learned spiritual ethics from them. Now, I rejected some of those
Mhm.
since then, and I've reformed my own,
Mhm.
and I have formed my own relationship. I kind of did go my own way eventually. And when I did leave the group, I was oversaturated with it all. And I was like, F spirituality, F paganism.
Mhm.
And I found my way back to it, but on my own terms and not somebody else's.
Mhm.
So I don't know if people could avoid that, or if they have to go through it with trial by fire. Sometimes you can't tell people like, oh, that's, until they experience it, that's
Mhm.
not, you know, and, it takes a lot of people who are, very comfortable or very susceptible to the group think to really start thinking for themselves. So some
Mhm.
people will stay in certain cults that are, and here's how do they get sometimes it just takes a good spot of narcissism and some
Mhm.
hubris to begin a cult. But there are people out there that are doing it on purpose,
Yeah.
that have learned from people who have successfully done it before. Like even L. Ron Hubbard, who
Mhm.
founded Scientology, created Scientology, has been quoted saying that if you actually want to make money, start a religion. So it's like he knew what he was doing.
Mhm.
And there are still people who think that they're in. a religion when they're actually in a cult.
And there are some very extreme cases. Again, we were talking about the Manson, you're talking about
Yeah.
Waco, you're talking about
Well, that's,
Jim
yep.
Jones. Those are extreme,
Right.
extreme versions of cults and things that are there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of minor things that are
Right.
happening right now that may not, hopefully, will never
Oh,
get to that level, that are still dangerous and
political.
still
There
happening.
are political
Political.
cults.
Oh,
And that's
oh
why I'm
God,
so,
absolutely.
so this is why I'm so passionate about learning how cults work, why people are susceptible to them, because ultimately it brings us to how do we save people from these sort of mind control entities?
Hmm.
How do we help people who want to get out deprogram their brain from all of the cult think, from the mind control that they were
Hmm.
given? And I believe that the one thing that will save our country's democracy is the ability to figure out how that is done.
Hmm. I understand that. So if it's something that we're looking at and we're thinking about doing and deprogramming, and if you're looking at different paths or looking at joining a group, whether that's a pagan group, whether that's a new faith, whether it's a sect of Christianity or Islam or Judaism or any of the others that are out there, when it's a minor spin-off of something that's of a larger
Mm-hmm.
organized thing, what are some of the things that we can do to really think about and look at and to make informed choices
Yeah.
before we step in? So maybe we won't know until we have the true trial by
Right.
fire, but there are usually red flags. And
Right.
what
And
are
that's the,
things that
so
we
that's
can
the
look
big
at
one
and see?
is right. So look up what some of the red flags to look out
Hmm.
for, but believe yourself. Believe what you see, not what they're telling you. That's a
Okay.
big one. Believe the red flags. Believe your intuition, because they're
Hmm.
gonna go and undermine all of that and try to, explain things away, or there's also this like manipulation that happens where you're not allowed to question things, question
Hmm.
everything.
Hmm.
Even question the stuff that you believe wholeheartedly. Even if your conclusion is, I still wholeheartedly believe this, at least you questioned it.
Hmm. It's like,
You
why
know,
am I believing this? What am I doing?
if something feels kind of off or kind of wrong, but you can't put your finger on it, I think some people, especially AFAB people, tend to give the benefit of the doubt and wait and see.
Hmm.
And that then you end up getting really deep in before you realize that that intuitional ping all along had merit.
Right. And I know you said we can Google lists and things
Yeah.
of things of red flags to look out for, but I think just kind of a few that our listeners can do quickly and think
Like
about there.
people trying to
Um,
control who you can and cannot talk to.
yeah, the isolation. What about if for any reason, for me, a big one is forced tithing.
Oh yeah,
If
right?
it's something that, okay, if you're going to join this, you must give 10% of your income
Right.
to the good of the church. Uh, Maybe, especially in today's community and commodities, 10% of your income might mean the difference between you being able to pay your rent or not.
Yeah,
And if you're being forced to do forced tithing or something else to support a religious practice, that's something that'd be a problem
I
with.
agree. Yeah.
If
Yeah, because
you
also if you're getting spiritual services but you have to pay millions of dollars for them and to climb this like, you know, imaginary ladder of enlightenment, and then you get there and it's
or
never what they're selling. It's snake oil salesman,
right, or
they're selling you snake oil.
the more money you give, the closer you are to God.
Oh yeah, right?
That's a huge one. If you are shamed for being who
Yeah.
you are, if you're shamed,
Yeah,
like, oh well, you can't be queer, you can't be
right.
this, or you're female, so therefore your role is this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Yeah,
huge red flag.
being, kind of manipulated or emotionally manipulated or forced to believe stuff that doesn't align with you, like, that undermines your personal identity, your who
Hmm.
you are, in favor of, not being that in order to fit in. Like,
Hmm.
look, we all want to belong, but
Hmm.
it's not worth sacrificing who you are to fit in.
Exactly. Don't lose your autonomy
You know,
for that. To me, a one that for me, just my own personal huge red flag, is if it somehow involves one person as being the Messiah or Savior.
yeah, yeah. And if we're putting more value in that person than,
Then
the spiritual
And
beings that we're supposedly worshiping, which I also yeah, that's a
and
whole
that one person is making all the rules.
yeah.
Therefore, all of the women
You
under
can't speak ill of
16
them.
are will be my concubines in the next level of obtaining heaven.
It is fascinating to me because I do think that it hooks into something in our human nature that draws people in. The other thing that obviously children are the most susceptible to,
Mm-hmm.
so children that are born in and raised in these things are second gen, third generations, they're far more susceptible to the abuses, and it's so much harder for them to get out because it's all they've ever known.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a hardcore recruiting that they go to, and they try to grab people.
Mm-hmm.
They are very big on trying to grab people, but around the late teens all the way up to the early mid 20s,
Mm-hmm.
because people's brain are still developing, they're still forming their ethics, they're still forming, deciding what morals and ethics, become part of their personal principles. And that's a really good time to get in there and start manipulating and brainwashing them, and so like they're very susceptible to cults.
Mm-hmm.
People who want to, one of the other things that some of the big cults do is they will recruit from out of country and get people here on a spiritual visa.
Mm-hmm.
Human trafficking. Yeah, so it's there's a lot to look out for. But on the like the small level, like, just, do you feel like somebody's making choices for you and kind of controlling how you feel about things and not letting you think for yourself? Do you feel like, you have to sacrifice what's best for you in order for what's best for the group?
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a balance.
Mm-hmm. And are they trying to alienate you from the
Yeah.
people that you know are positive role models in your life that you never had an
Uh-huh.
issue with until suddenly they did?
Right.
Or they've said something
And
that says now you're having
if
a
other
problem.
people in your life bring up concerns and on all of a sudden the cult hates them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as I say the cult, but like the group, the spiritual
Mm-hmm.
group or whatever, and I I can get really cynical and say all religions are culty. There's a bit of an aspect to that. But there are, I mean, I'm not saying it's not worth finding groups and learning
Mm-hmm.
from people. I think early on, I definitely, if I had not learned in real life the way my brain works,
Mm-hmm.
hands on from people, learned the good stuff and the bad, what not to do, the bad stuff that, or, that's subjective, but like the stuff that I rejected.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, there's merit to
Mm-hmm.
all of that. Just be aware,
Mm-hmm.
be
Exactly.
careful.
It's because there is community. There is a huge value in community
Yes.
and spiritual community, queer community. All of that is something that's incredibly important for development, for understanding, for
Yeah.
all of that. It's just how do you navigate what is the helpfulness
Yeah.
of the community and that sense of belonging and being part of something greater to something that
Yeah.
is manipulative and can control you. So it's that
Yeah.
really fine balance of when does it go too far
Yeah.
and start looking for those things that would make it fit and work for you versus something else. Because
But
at
if
some
it
point,
is majorly altering your personal ethics in order to fit in or belong to this, you know,
community.
go
Yeah.
back to your ethics.
Mm-hmm.
You earned and learned those the hard way. And yeah, question them, but don't let anybody undermine them. High control groups. That's another,
Mm-hmm.
red flag, right? If it's a very high control group, if they're telling you what you can and cannot eat, where you can and cannot worship, how you can and cannot dress, who you can and cannot love,
Mm-hmm.
not okay.
Yeah. But with that, is there any last words? Is there any last little thing that you would recommend or suggest?
I I know how easy it is to just want someone to tell you what to do or how to do something, how to believe,
Mm-hmm.
how comforting that is, especially our inner child
Mm-hmm.
who developed by being told how to live by adults.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there comes a time in our spiritual growth that we need to self empower. We need to think for ourselves. We need to not use a middleman to
Mm-hmm.
access our higher selves or our spiritual, whatever you want to call it, deities
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. Um, so my final thought is strive towards self empowerment. There's too much stuff in our culture that is trying to disempower people in general.
Hmm.
So don't give away your power.
Especially as queer people, don't give away your power.
Yeah. And don't let anybody shame you or judge you for being who you were born to be.
Hmm.
Even if they don't understand it, you know who you are. They don't get to tell you who you are
Hmm. And you can find your community and you can have community without
without being a,
being in a
yeah.
cult.
Yeah. And if people keep pressuring you to join their group, just yell in their face, I'm not going to join your cult, because I have done that. Even when it wasn't a cult, but I've called it a cult anyway, because I don't want to join your group.
That works. All right.
I do join groups sometimes. It's just I'm very discerning.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know until you get in and they
Yeah.
say, nope, this
Yep.
is not
Yep.
right for me. And you go bye-bye. And that's
Right.
totally
Follow.
okay.
Yeah. Your intuition, though, man,
Hmm.
that shit is gold. It
Hmm.
will tell you. You don't always know how to listen to it until you really learn how to listen to it, but
Hmm.
sharpen that skill set too.
Hmm.
Listen to your higher knowing. There, it's in there somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's telling you things. I'm very grateful and that we have our listeners that are
Hmm.
tuning in for this topic that I love. So thank you so much for listening, and give us, if you like what you were hearing, or want to engage, give us some comments, give us some likes, or even subscribe here and there, get notifications for when we upload new episodes. But yeah, tell us what you think.
And
Engage.
And if there is a topic you'd like to know more about or an episode topic you would like to suggest, please contact us at thequeerwitchproject@gmail.com or find us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram with the handle @queerwitchproject. We upload every other week. And remember, queerness is a key to magic.
Be yourself and love rebelliously. Bye.
Bye! Agreed.
Yeah. Passionate about this stuff.
Yes, and we can talk about this at much, much length, but I think we've got
For
most of
sure.
the basics
Yes.
of this.
I'm not
So
looking at the outline. I'm leaving that to you. You tell me. Are we
I
wrapping this
am.
up?
Yes, we're a little out of order, but that's okay. We got most of it on here.
I
Um,
loves.